Hello, this is a prepaid call from Joe.
Welcome to Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker.
And I'm your co-host, Anais Lucia. And today we actually have a very special episode because we have a special guest, which is Joe's youngest son, Joe Baker III. But we'll be calling him Boo, as that is his nickname, just to make it a little bit easier for the listeners so they don't get confused.
Before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background about me and my son. He was born in 1987, so when I got locked up in 1989, he was right at 2 or barely 2 years old. I think he had just started walking, and I really don't, know how to say this other than this just straight out, is that, I got to know my son before he got locked up with me through visitation and phone calls. And the visitations, my sister, he would come with her and we would get to, visit, for the few hours that they would allow visits. And we really didn't have the type of relationship that I wanted. It was nothing to do with him. It wasn't his fault. It was my fault because I was in here. But I always had it in the back of my mind that my sons, both of them, they had resentment towards me, but both of them, they always told me that they loved me, but I always had this in the back of my mind, this fear that, is it real? Is it true? Because, the truth of the matter is I just didn't think that I deserved their love because I wasn't there for them. And then my son got locked up with me, and then we started to get to know each other. And I'm going to stop right there and let my son say something, and then we're going to get right into it, because I think you're going to enjoy what we're going to be talking about, because I think it's important for people to know that being a parent in prison is still important, and you still have a role to play in your child's life. But I'm going to go ahead and let my son say something before we get to the show.
Appreciate that. Well, first and foremost, I want to say, I love you, man. I want to tell you I love you. And, growing up without a father, I don't think you realize how much you really need that in your life until you reach a certain age. I don't think you realize how much you miss out on as far as growth, especially a kid growing into becoming a young man and on to a man. I don't think you realize how important it is as a child, having that or what you're missing out on. And growing up, we did have, my mother was dating a guy that she ended up having a child with that was there, and he was, I guess, tried to be whatever father figure he could, but him being in the life that he lived, I don't think he was, what I believe every child needs to get to become what it is they need to become on the up and up end. So I didn't even really realize what I was lacking or what I needed until I reached a certain age. And that's when the resentment hit, when it was like, if my daddy was here, this, if my daddy was here, that, if my daddy was here, maybe this would be better. If my daddy was here, maybe mama wouldn't be struggling the way she's struggling. If my daddy was here, he would have been able to protect me from this. If my daddy was here, maybe I wouldn't have tried that. Then that's when it started to hit. When, as a kid, though, you just you just a kid. You just moving around. I'm going to basketball practice. And then I started to notice, and that's another level of resentment, when you start to notice, okay, that child dad is here. That child dad is here. And then you be like, okay. And then that kicks in. And then same thing with like being in school. If it was if you're a car rider and these kids' parents are picking it up and you see their dad in their car, you're like, dang. And the only time I'm getting to talk to my dad is when they say you have a collect call from, and I hear his name, Joe, and it's accepted. And then at the end of the call, it's saying you have 60 seconds left on this call. Like, when you hearing that, as a young kid, and then versus seeing somebody's dad being there physically, and to see that dad maybe being affectionate, or that dad giving advice on the basketball court, do it this way and do it that way. And the only thing you can think is, my dad gonna call me collect at 5:30, or we're going to see him and we got a certain amount of time. And the only time I really get to kick it with my dad is when we walking up to a vending machine, putting the card in and waiting for the snack to fall out so we can go sit at the table. And you know what I'm saying? So that's when that resentment started, when you start realizing if he was here, it could have possibly been different.
How old were you when you first started to, feel that resentment towards me?
I think I would say around the time maybe when Granddaddy died, when your dad died. I think because with Granddaddy being there, even though I felt like Granddaddy was that to me in a way, whether he was there as much as I wanted him to be or not, he was there. Like it was nothing to go see Granddaddy. I could walk in and see him, with the fake leg, and it was just something about his presence. You know what I'm saying? Or if I wanted to go when he had the store, and I go in, he'd be like, "Well, you need some money? You want a burger or something?" It was just his presence of knowing whether he was guiding me or whether it was just knowing I'm gonna go see Granddaddy. And so I think it was around a little bit after Granddaddy left, because that's kind of around the time I think I really started getting in trouble a lot too. And it was more like, my dad ain't here. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's when I really started to notice, because, I got much love for Uncle Squeaker, man. That's my guy. I love him to death. But he didn't carry that presence I felt like just Granddaddy had. It was just different. Yeah, like Uncle Stevie, Uncle Stevie came to town here and there. I know that's Uncle. If I needed to, I could have called, but it wasn't that presence like Granddaddy. Granddaddy gave me that father figure feel for some reason. You know what I'm saying? So when he left, it was like, I didn't have it, and then it's like, but my dad is still alive, and the only time I can really talk to him is when he called me. It's like he ain't here, so
Yeah. Well, Anna Eve, I hope that's enough context. If you want any more other than that, just come on with it, however you want to do this.
Yeah, so just kind of maybe go back to when you first, were in prison, I guess, together. So for both of you, what was it like? Like for Joe, if you maybe want to go first, what was it like being in a prison cell with your son?
I want to go first if I can.
Okay, sure.
Okay, you go first.
Okay. Well, it's some context actually behind that. I remember somebody asking me one time, did I go to prison to be with my dad? Never did I, expect to get in trouble or try to get in trouble intentionally to go to prison and expect. It was a rare situation, I believe, for us to even get around each other. But by the time I had stepped into the prison, it was bittersweet, because in there, whether my daddy ever knew it or not, on the streets, I heard a lot about my daddy that still made him a hero to me in my eyes, regardless of, what people said about my daddy. I gravitate positive, because in so many ways I felt that I was like him, and I wanted to be like him, whether I got to know who he was or not, or got to know him through other people. You know what I'm saying? I felt like that was a part of me. So by the time I got to prison, what it was like, I was still hearing similar things, great things about my daddy. He wrote books, and he was this and he was that. He was, you know what I'm saying? So once I got there, it was bittersweet. It was like I hated under the circumstances, but at the same time, man, I'm finna get to meet my hero. You know what I'm saying? So by the time I got around him, even though the resentment was, I think, laying dormant at the time, the resentment didn't come out, I think, to later on down when we were cellies for a while. When I first got around him, I was more so excited about getting just to be around him. You know what I'm saying? It was weird because we in prison, but at the same time, it was like, man, like anytime I seen him walking, like he bow-legged, like my granddaddy, and like me, and in my mind, it's like, man, that's my daddy. You know what I'm saying? So if he came to the cell and we made food together, like I would sit back and watch and be like, man, that's daddy. I would watch his mannerism, how he moved, and be like, man, I was saying, I'll be like, I would have said that the same way. Like I got to see a lot of where I came from even under them circumstances. So for me, you know, it was bittersweet. It was hard, but it was. I wouldn't go back and change it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Dig that. For me, it was bittersweet as well, but it was more. I was more afraid because in this environment, I'd been here a long time before he got here, you know, and I was so terrified that something would happen to him and I couldn't protect him. Yeah, I was happy to see him. Not that happy to see him come to prison. I was not happy about that, but I was happy to see him, and so that I could wrap my arms around and protect him as much as I could. But I was terrified the whole time. I was terrified the whole time. I was living a lifestyle that I was playing both sides of the fence, you know, just keeping it blunt. And I was living a lifestyle where at any time anything could happen, and now it's not only going to happen to me possibly, but it could happen to my son, and I was terrified of that. Now, keeping it real, you know, that fear didn't make me stop what I was doing. I thought I could manage it, you know, with the rules and how the streets go and how the prison rules go. I thought that I could manage all of that and keep him safe, and I think I did the best that I could under the circumstances. But for me, it was bittersweet. I was happy to see him. This is my baby, you know what I'm saying? I watch him when he sleeps. I watch how he, you know, he rocks his leg when he sleeps, and all of those types of things. You know, when he tried to cook for me, you know, and he thinks he can cook, you know. So I remember that. Also watching it. You know, and,
that's when I first got there. I was a little rusty.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember going to the gym and watching him play, and while I'm watching him run up and down the court because he can play ball, I'm flashing back in my mind like, dang, I missed all of that. I remember taking him to the barbershop, and, and this is funny because when I took him to the barbershop for the first time, I'm talking to the barbers at this barbershop as if my son is a child. And this is his first haircut, and I'm trying to tell him, right. Take care of my son, you know. And it was just, I was afraid that I was gonna mess up again.
Oh.
I messed up when I left him, you know, and I was so afraid that I was gonna do or say something and make him angry with me and make him not tell me what I always thought in the back of my mind, that he really didn't love me, you know. And that fear stayed with me until, you know, we had our big argument, you know.
Right.
And I'll let you tell that part, you know, and then I'll jump in. But yeah, go ahead, you know.
How that ended up happening, because I do, you know, on my social media, a lot of people ask, you know what I'm saying, about our relationship. And I said, man, I talk to my dad almost every day. If not, it's probably on he working. If not, every other day. We're gonna talk several times a week. And a lot of people ask, how did we get to that point, knowing that he missed so much of my life, you know what I'm saying? And it was a moment where I was because we had a cell phone, and that's how he persuaded me. Let's put that on her too. And he persuaded me to come to the prison.
Oh my God.
He was telling me that he was gonna get me a phone. Well, he told me that he had me a phone. So when I got there, we got two phones, but he telling me he want to keep the other phone put up just in case the other one get jammed up. So I'm thinking, okay, okay, cool. So we sharing a phone. So one day I'm on the phone talking to my daughter. Make a long story short, his gal had called and I didn't answer the phone, and I ended up taking the phone back, and he called me back to the cell because I went to go play chess. He called me back to the cell, and when I walked in, he was like, "Why you didn't answer the phone?" And in my brain, I was just like, you know, I didn't answer the phone because I knew as soon as I got out with it, who I was talking to, you know, I was just going to bring the phone and let him call back. And the only reason I got upset is because I felt like he chastised me in front of a woman that did not raise me, wasn't at court dates with me, wasn't there, didn't go through the pain, didn't go through, you know, helping me grow, didn't go through the struggle. And as he was saying, I wouldn't have took offense to it had he not been on the phone, because when I was watching you sit down on the bunk, you still had the phone to your ear, and I was like, she on the phone and she getting to hear him basically check me, and I'm like, she don't get to get that, you know what I'm saying? She don't. And he was like, next time she called my phone, bring me my phone. And it was the tone, and I was like, no, not in front of her, no. But at that moment, that brought everything Like, hold on, you don't even get to say that. You don't even get to say that. You don't even deserve to say that at this point. You don't get to check me. Like, you ain't been here. You ain't done it. We sitting in the cell, man, and then you talking to me the way you talking to me with somebody who don't know me, didn't raise me, and you getting like that. Like, it was like, dang, you don't even. And at that point, I was like, you know what? Put your shoes on.
Yeah.
But that was the moment. But when that happened, like, he had kept the phone from me a couple of days, and I ended up getting into it with one of his partners, Tiny, God rest his soul, man, good dude. And he called me to the cell. He was like, let me talk to you. Because I had went in the cell and roughed him up a little bit. Man, where the phone at? And he wouldn't give me a phone. So when I got in the cell with my daddy, he was like, man, he started talking. And in the middle of this conversation, whatever was being said as far as about the phone, he was like, man, step out of the cell real quick. And I was like, man, I ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? Right. But when I said that, I noticed that my daddy was coming to a moment, and I noticed that it was he think I don't care, or I'm being disrespectful, or I don't love him. This is coming from a different, like what I'm channeling and feeling, he thinking this is whatever may have been in the back of his head is coming to the surface. So right. So when he turned, he was like, man, step out the cell. But I noticed, I had never seen my daddy cry, and I noticed some emotion come off of him.
Wow.
And he kind of turned his back to try to hide that moment. And when he did it, I stepped up to him and I kind of grabbed his shoulders. And in the hostile moment that we were in, he kind of janked away real quick, kind of aggressive, almost like he didn't know if I was going to reach or hit him, or if it was a care, if it was affection. He didn't know what it was. And he kind of janked away from him and kind of threw his arm at the same time. And at that time, he had broke. And I had broke, and I was like, man, I love you. And he was like, nah, he said, man, you don't love me. He said, you don't love me, boo. And I said, I do love you. And at that, I embraced him. You know what I'm saying? We embraced each other. And at this time, we started having a conversation, and I started saying, and I needed the moment, I think, because it was a painful moment to say what needed to be said, but at the same time, it was a sensitive moment to be able to receive what was being said and why. It wasn't a lash out moment like, man, you know what, I hate you. You know what I'm saying? This is a time to say it and not come off like, you know what, forget you. You know what I'm saying? I got to say what I said, how I felt. And he got to apologize from a genuine place of, that was I guess you could say it wasn't intentional. I didn't leave you intentionally. Like, these are the circumstances, this what happened. And, you know what I'm saying? If I could, I wouldn't have done it. Like, I wouldn't have left you and your brother. Most important, I wouldn't have left your mama to raise y'all on her own. Like, I would have been there, so to be able to hear it in that moment, I was able to receive it versus probably better than if he would have ever said, which I'm sure he said it on phone calls many times, me growing up. It was different in that moment, in that cell, which I thank the Most High for that, because I could receive it at that time. And then not only that, I'm gonna leave with this, I had made the same mistake he did. So I had to extend the same grace. I left my child in a similar situation. Our cases are almost the same. Oh. You know what I'm saying? And I'm asking him, I'm angry at him because of what he did, and I knew what he did growing up because I was going to prison to see him. And in the middle of me living how I was living, I never stopped to say, I'm not going to make the same mistake. I did it too. Mm-hmm. So I was able to come down, I think, at that moment. And I think, and he handled it better than I think he did. So.
Yeah, but see, for me, it was like kind of that moment I was handling, go back to the phone. Mm-hmm. I was handling that moment as if you wasn't my son. I know you my son, but I'm checking you like I would check anybody else. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? That violated that line. That was a prison line. And that's because I didn't know, and I understand that now, but I didn't know how to be a father in that situation. You know what I'm saying? Because you hadn't actually done anything wrong, but in prison, that's not what you do. A situation like that, it's like, boom, somebody call on the phone that you don't own, get that to them.
Right.
I didn't handle it right. I didn't handle it because this is my son. My son don't mean no malice towards me. So I didn't have to go like that, but I didn't realize that that's part of that, not knowing how to be a father. You know what I'm saying? And not believing that I had the right, deep in my heart anyway, not believing that I had the right to be a father. And that clouded me. That helped. I had a blind spot to, what do I say and when do I say it and what tone do I use? I didn't have any experience in that. The experience that I had watching my father, you know what I'm saying, when he raised me, my father was in prison. My grandparents raised me on both sides of my mother's parents and my father's parents. I knew the model. I knew how to do that on the streets. But in here, I didn't know. And this was like, we were together shortly at Turner Center, but this was the longest we had been together at this particular prison. And it was like, what do I do? I had no experience. So I handled it the best way that I knew how. And it turned out to be, in my opinion, one of the best things that ever happened because it brought that moment. And we were able to say some things that needed to be said. And from that point on, my son's my best friend. I try to be more of a father than a friend, but he's my best friend. And that's just what it is. So,
Okay. So I just want to, just for the listeners, just a little bit of information, just to clarify. Boo, how long were you in prison?
I went in 2007. I was released. I finished my sentence in 2017.
Okay.
I've been home. I've been home 4 years. It made 4 years in May since I've been home.
Okay. And how old were you when you first arrived there?
When I went in, I think I was 19. I want to say 19, or I was 18, turning 19. I'm sure I was right at 19.
Okay. Joe, I'm wondering, did you tell the other inmates that maybe he's your son, or did you think maybe having you there kind of protected him or made just?
Oh, I ain't no doubt about that. Absolutely, it protected it because I had this reputation. I was affiliated, Gangster Disciple at that time, and in Northeast I'd already retired at that point. But the point is, my reputation was still intact and people still knew me and all of that kind of stuff. So him being there with me, he had a certain grace, you know what I'm saying, as far as the boundaries he could push. It was like, wait a minute, that's Joe's son. What's going on? Let's talk to him first. You know what I'm saying? But it did. And even when he was at other places before he was with me, it was, it was extended towards him. I made sure that people at other places knew that's me. You know what I'm saying? Okay. And the same thing for my other son, that was in here. That hands off, you know what I mean? So, that extended to him a little bit,
Okay. And Joe, how did you feel about your son, getting involved in a gang?
I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I always tried to hide that from them. I remember I have this mark on me. And he asked me about it at visit one day, and I wouldn't tell him. So as the story goes, he was telling me. As a matter of fact, let me answer like this. No, I didn't like him being in the game, but I'm gonna tell you how that happened. I'm gonna let him tell you how that happened. So you go ahead.
Like he was saying, I had seen the mark. It's a mark he got. I guess it's almost like a what do they call it? Almost like a branding. Yeah, it's a branding pitchfork between his thumb and his index. I think it's the index finger. And I had actually went to juvenile. I had got sent away for the first time for burglary, for theft over. I think it was $1,000. We were broke in someone's house, and went to court. And he placed me in DCS custody. And while I was in DCS custody, I got to this place in Nashville, Tennessee, called NTC, Nashville Transition Center. And while I was there, I noticed people throwing up that sign that I seen on my dad's hand. And I would see drawings. There's certain things I would see, and all of a sudden I was hearing people say what it meant and what it was, and I connected the two. I was like, oh, that's what he is. That's what I'm gonna be. That's what I'm gonna be. And so that's how the connection was made. And I remember when I came home. I think I was wearing black flag. Somebody told him that I was wearing black flag, and he called. He was like, "What's up with these black flags you wear?" And I was like, "Man, I'm a gangster." And he was like, "Man, you don't know what you talking about." I was like, "Man, whatever." But yeah, that's how that happened.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's exactly how that happened. But I didn't like it. I didn't want him to do it. I didn't know. That's something I always wanted to keep from him because I know the reality of it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And he found out later on, you know, everything that I know about it, he found out on his own later on. So, you know, but yeah, no, to answer your question, Anais, no, I didn't like it at all. You know.
Okay, so I was wondering, Boo, sometimes us as children, sometimes we'll kind of do things that maybe, you know, our parents do, but we don't really realize we're doing it or something. So like, you know, because there are similarities between what happened to both of you, like, you know, Boo, do you feel like in a way, you know, you were kind of trying to be like your dad or something, or?
Man, I'm gonna tell you something crazy. That's what I was talking about earlier, like all of the similarities that we have, like never being around him, I had no, like, listen, for instance, you know, when you do something and your parents say, you just like your dad, or you got that from your dad. Like, I heard that a lot growing up, but it was different when I got around him and got to see, that's why, like, certain things, like I can remember being in the cell one day and he was having to explain and give somebody some advice, and at the same time he was having to correct and check them. But it was the animation and the look and the mannerism of how he did it, and I was sitting there like, it was scary. It was like,
wow.
It was like an out of body experience. Like I would have did it the exact same way. You know what I'm saying? Or certain ways he moved and done things, like being calculated and strategic. You know what I'm saying? And growing up, I didn't get to see where this came from. I didn't know, like, how I operated. I'm thinking I'm just operating and learning life as I go. Come to find out, DNA and it's very strong. Like this, it come from this is coming from him, and I have never been around him.
Wow.
So when I finally got around him, I was like, man, that's crazy. Like, even sometimes when I laugh, my mama would say on the phone, he sound like your dad.
Wow.
And being around him and seeing him laughing, it's like, he sound like me. You know what I'm saying? It was sound like me. right. It was weird. Like, one of our first, I remember us being out on the yard, and we were walking, and this guy didn't know that I was his son, and he was walking behind us, and he was like, "Joe, who is that you got walking with you, man? He walk just alike." And we both kind of turned around at the same time, simultaneously. You know what I'm saying? And the guy kind of jumped. He was like, "Whoa!" My daddy said, "Yeah, that's my son." He said, "Man, you ain't got to tell me. Y'all look just alike."
No doubt. Yeah, I remember.
But yeah, it was weird. It was just weird. It was weird. It was weird. Like that was it helped fill one of the biggest voids I think I've ever had. Any of my success now, I have to credit it the most to the second most, because first and foremost to the Most High. I have to credit that moment around my dad, because I got to all those familiar that you talking about, those familiarities and stuff like that. I got to embrace where they come from in a great positive way, because the way it was told to me majority of the time came from a bad place. But by the time I got around and got to see all of these things he was using his mind and heart for, they had turned into great things. So I was able to embrace that part of me and take that bad out and use it, and he helped me channel it right and watching it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Okay.
That's something, let me say this real quick, Anais. That's something that I wanted to emphasize in this episode, so that people will understand the value of a parent, whether they're in prison or not. Because I hear a lot of talk about how we can make our communities safer out there on the streets and all these things. And it's one component that I really believe that the system and the society and people are missing out on, and that is including the people in prison in this solution. We have to be able to find that safe space, that middle ground, to where parents in prison that are trying to do the right thing, they need that support to be able to support their kids and be able to say and do the right thing without passing that anger on. Because I know a lot of the resentment and the anger that I felt about being in here by the way I was treated, not by the other inmates, but by the staff, by the people that run the prisons. Not all of them in here are bad. That's absolutely not the case. Mm-hmm. But you'll always have an officer here or an administrator there that will treat you in a way that'll make you feel anger and resentment and contempt towards the system. Mm-hmm. And not meaning to, you'll talk to your kids or your family, you'll pass that on to them. Or that you instead of telling them, don't do this and don't do that, you'll be open to telling them, man, go on and do this, and this is straight, that's straight. Mm-hmm. And when that's the wrong rap that you should be giving them, that's the wrong advice you should be giving them. And I think that's why, with the relationship that I have with my sons, both of my sons now, if society decided that, look, we need all hands on deck. We need everybody to be trying to figure out how we can make our community safe. And in that small way, if people in prison, when they finally get to that point where they take full responsibility for what they've done and own it, and then they pass that on to their kids in a positive way, I think that can go a long way in helping solve the problems out there in our communities and make them a little safer. Now, I don't want to get too far off of what we were talking about, but so go ahead with your next question. So.
Yeah. That could be the whole future episode, maybe talking about that.
Yeah.
So, Joe, do you feel like maybe you were, part of the reason that your son ended up in prison?
I do. I feel totally responsible for both of my sons ending up in prison because some of the advice that I gave them, I was trying to be more of a friend as opposed to being a father. And yeah, I put my oldest son, I'll never forget when he went and bought his first cocaine. And anyway, I thought it was his first anyway, because that's what he told me. Let me put it that way. And when he told me that he had been tricked, somebody sold him some fake dope, me trying to be a friend as opposed to a father, I called one of my partners that was in the game real heavy and put him on. That wasn't right. You know what I'm saying? And that led my son to be involved in the dope game, which ultimately led him to prison, right?
Oh, okay.
My youngest son, I didn't give him the right advice in a lot of situations because I was trying to be his friend more than to be his father. And what happened? That advice, the road that I put him on led him to commit the crime that he committed, in my opinion. He may believe different, but I believe that I had something to do with both of them ending up in prison. So yes, I feel totally responsible, and that's what I mean by, being a parent as opposed to being a friend. That will help. But yeah, I believe that I am responsible. I don't know what he thinks. What do you think?
Yeah, see, and I agree. In some instances, which all of it, to me, not being there was the biggest contributing factor to leading down that kind of path anyway. So it compounded coming from adding the wrong advice to it. So it just stacked it. It just stacked the chances up. But in that at this place I can look back and see, going back to not knowing how to parent or not knowing what to do. He taking the road of, I want whatever kind of relationship I can get with my kids versus I'm not going to say no, I'm not going to say do this, I'm not going to say don't do it that way. And then they run the risk of somebody doing it for him. He tried to step in and be whatever he could, even in the wrong. I can look back and see it now, which I did have moments when it was like, man, wait a minute. Why in the world did he do that? Why in the world would he say that? Like even when you just said about my big brother, about you know what I'm saying, the bad dope transaction. I remember telling my dad, I was like, man, bro won't do this and won't give me this and won't give me that. And he did the same thing for me. Look, I'm for the call such and such, and boom. Yeah. So by the time I'm looking back at some of this, I'm like, why in the world did he do that?
Oh.
But I understand different, and like, man, I want to be whatever I can because I haven't been able to be anything. You know what I'm saying? So I'm able to apply grace in that area of ignorance versus saying, man, you wrong, it's straight up wrong for that. Like, even when it came to the affiliation, when you asked how did he feel about that, I remember having to go through the process again, and I asked him, I was like, man, what you think about it? And he said these are his exact words. He said, I recommend it for the experience. So by the time, listen, but I get what he was saying now, you know, but by the time I was in a cell fighting 3 people and one person rotating when one getting tired and these people about killed me, I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean he recommended this for the experience? But I get, at that point, I think it was good and bad at the same time, because it was like, he might do it anyway, you know what I'm saying? But if he do it, and he'll get to taste and see, that ain't really what's up to a certain, you know what I'm saying? So it was, you know, but yeah, so.
Yeah. I thought that I could control even that.
Right.
But I thought I could control it because all of my friends, the people that was in the tops and all that, and I was at the top with them. Okay, I can control this. He won't get hurt too bad. You know what I'm saying? And he'll figure out this is bull. You feel what I mean? So, yeah, you know.
But to stay on the question about, you know, I think to any parent, not just my dad, it's for any parent, mother or father, you know, when you're not playing the role that needed to be played when you bring in children into this world. Even myself, I've made the same mistake. That's the number one contributor to a great possibility of them taking a road that you as a parent don't want to see a child go down. So that was the number one. And then on 2, him not being there and wanting to be there in whatever way he can just compounded the chances. So
okay.
Right.
So what is something that both of you learned about each other that you didn't know before, you know, while you were in prison together?
Let me go first. Okay. I did not realize, and I'm kind of taken away from what he just said a few minutes back. I did not realize how much he's like me. I just really didn't. And I didn't realize how much a person could be like you that never been around you, and how grateful my son is, how gracious he is, how humble he is. And I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, you know, all of the things that I remember growing up in the neighborhood, and everybody would always say, Joe T, he'll help anybody. He'll do this, he'll do that. And I'm learning that about my son. My son would help anybody. I mean, strangers, anybody. He would help anybody. And I'm like, wow, you know, all the good things. And that's the one thing I really just love about him. All the good things that I thought about myself and what I've been told about myself, he's got it. He's got it. And I've learned that about him. Yeah, he's got it. He's got it. And he's going to do great things. So, yeah, I've learned that my son is way more than the surface shows, you know, and he's a hell of a man. I
appreciate that. And I'm gonna have to ride on that comment too. You know, what did I take? You know, being around him, I've seen so much of what was in me. Like I was saying earlier, just kind of it pulled it out and enhanced it. You know what I'm saying? The same thing he was just saying about me as far as his heart towards people. I seen my daddy help a lot of people in prison in the short period of time we were there, but it was the heart that he had. It was the same kind of character and personality that I knew that I possessed and carried. You know what I'm saying? And being around the family, I could see bits and pieces of certain things that may come from my granddaddy and stuff like that. But being around, it was just like, man, that's amazing. Like even my artistic skills as far as writing and stuff like that, like being around him and seeing him write and take notes, the way he planned and do things, I was like, that's like I do that.
Wow.
Like the way if somebody say something, like he don't have to, and sometimes we just have it like that. It's just in the DNA to have the answer right off the bat. But the way he processed things before he respond, I carry that.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And it helped to enhance it, to see it. It made it even better. I'm just like, you know what? But it's a lot of things I could say. You know what I'm saying? That just being around, it was just like, man, that's crazy. Like he said, as far as being humble, even after doing so many, the strength that he carried. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So my mama told me, boy, like as much as I've been through. And go, and it's just like, man, really, the time he's done, and like that's worse. But my dad is strong as an ox. You know what I'm saying? That I see where they come from. Like that's that strength to just that willpower, regardless of the circumstances. Like, okay, you get out, you a felon, go get a job and do the man, whatever. My dad is sitting in prison writing books and doing podcasts and making games and hoodies and t-shirts. I'm not finna work a 9 to 5. I got, you know what I'm saying? That man sitting in prison, man, with willpower. You talking about go get a 9 to 5 and make $9 to $12, $10 an hour. Man, you crazy. That man, I'm finna go do some things. I'm finna go be great.
That's awesome.
But,
make your mark on the world. That's right.
Yeah, so you know what I'm saying? So, be around that, it's just, and I, like he said all ago, is my best friend, because it's only one person in this world at this point I draw from, regardless of where he's at. When he calls, you know what I'm saying, the creativity, the ideas, the thoughts, like we just, like the ideas they just come, boom, 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 boom. Yeah. And not only do they come from him, I know he has the he's competent and has the whatever it is to actually make that manifest, regardless of the circumstances. You know what I'm saying? We sitting on here doing a podcast. It's on, I guarantee you, across the state across the nation right now, it's probably only 10 inmates, probably out of millions, that has that. My dad is just so happens to be one.
Yeah.
So
thank you for that.
Wow. That's really beautiful to hear from both of you.
You have 1 minute remaining.
I just wanted to thank you for doing this show. I wanted to thank my son for being on the show. And we'll do this again next week. And this has been Doing Time with Joe. Now, I'm your host, Joe Baker. And
I'm your co-host, Anaïs Lucia.
And we'll see you next week.
Yes. Thank you, Boo.
Thank you for using GTL.